different parts of the country need different types of cattle, and we understand that. And I don't know if we're the ones that need to tell folks what kind of cattle to raise or how they should do. We see the need for, up in the Dakotas, in your part of the world, they raise really, really nice front end type, Angus cattle and other breeds as well. And then in South Texas, I mean, those cattle would burn up, right? They'd get too hot in South Texas. So they need something with a little more of a Brahman influence. And so it's hard for me to be judgmental. Sitting where I am in the Panhandle of Texas, we tend to get a few more of those Brahman type cattle and feed them out here. And that makes sense because they would do better here, and they probably wouldn't really love y'all's winters, especially like you've had this year. So there's a spot for all of them. There really is. But if you have a good product and have cattle that work for you, learn more about them in the feed yards and how they do perform, and then make changes based on that. That's all we can ask. I don't think there's any one thing other than a good health background and a good background and be good stewards of the cattle. That's all we can ask.
Hey, I'm Shaye, and I'm the host of Casual Cattle Conversations, a podcast created for cattlemen and women to explore new ideas that will improve their bottom line. Now, I want to give back to my listeners, so in the month of April, I'm doing a giveaway. So if you rate and review the show on your favorite podcast app or Facebook, I'll enter you into the drawing. If you would like additional ranching resources outside of what's shared in these podcast episodes, please head over to my website, casualcattleconversations.com. I have links to free resources that I turn to, and there's also an opportunity there for you to connect with other cattle producers and industry experts through the Rancher Mind program. Now with that, let's get on with today's episode. Hey folks, I want to take a quick second to talk about a company that's doing some pretty cool things, because we all know as cattle producers that funding and finances can be a little stressful, but Harvest Returns makes things simpler. Cattle ranching is hard work, but finding funding to start or grow your operation doesn't have to be. While traditional bank loans still have a place in finance, some ranchers have transitioned to an alternative form of funding through passive investors. Harvest Returns has raised over $12 million for multiple cattle ranchers across the United States. Harvest Returns works with each ranch individually to help develop flexible terms that best suit the business's plan and cash flows. The company's pool of nearly 13,000 investors can help you expand your herd, fund improvements to your ranch, or help you scale to access new channels. Harvest Returns offers both debt or equity options and works within your existing operating model. To learn more about the capital raise process with Harvest Returns, visit harvestreturns.com/CCC, and I'll put that link in the show notes. Well, good morning, Ryan. It is great to have you on the podcast today. I know you and I and a few other people who are in my Rancher Mind program were able to interact on that call. It's been over a year now, which is crazy to think. I guess time flies, but we're really going to dive into what your role is in the feedlot industry and kind of talk about what cattle producers need to understand about that industry and how we can work together as two different segments within one overarching industry. But to start off, would you please talk a little bit about, what your role is and where you're located and kind of just what you do so that the audience can get a feel for who you are?
You bet. So my name is Ryan Moorhouse, and I'm the general manager of Hartley Feeders, which is a feed yard that is owned by Five Rivers Cattle Feeding, which is a larger entity, one of 11 facilities that they own and operate. I've been in this business for 25 years, roughly. I grew up on a cow calf and stocker operation in north central Texas, kind of halfway between Lubbock and Wichita Falls, Texas, out in the middle of nowhere, and then went to school and got out of school and wanted to see a different part of the industry. I've spent a lot of time in that part of the industry growing up and learning it, and actually did an internship in Southwest Kansas when I was in college still, and really in a feed yard, and really enjoyed it. And so when I got out of school, I started looking for jobs because I wasn't ready to move home yet, and landed on this one. And at the time, it was a Continental Grain owned 6 yards, and I went to work for them. And we've evolved over time and had a couple of different owners. But really the core structure and the core management team stayed together. So it's allowed me to stay here and work my way up. And I've been at this facility for the last 12 years and managing it. And so that kind of caught me up on the timeline.
Wow. Well, I always enjoy hearing about people who, maybe grew up in one sector of the industry and do try other sectors of the industry. So how did being involved in the cow-calf industry growing up and stocker industry help you as a professional in the feedlot space? Like how did that knowledge base there help you do your job better now, I guess?
Well, it really helps if you're raised in the knowing where the starting point is and being in the cow-calf industry and then in the stocker business. And my curiosity was, I helped my dad load lots of cattle that went to the feed yard and had no idea where they went and wanted to learn more. And so that's what got me started. And we fed a few cattle out, retained ownership. And so that's what got the curiosity there. And then working in the feed yard in college as an intern, really enjoyed the business. It's a faster paced business, faster paced environment. When you confine that many animals together, obviously you've got a lot of work to do every day. And so I like the pace of the business, and that's what's kept me here. As far as education wise, we buy all our own feeder cattle into the feed yards at our own locations, which is a little different than some of the other larger feeding entities. So it allows me to understand their business, whether on the cow-calf side or the stocker side, and to relate to those folks and to hopefully help them make good decisions as well. And of course, I have a job to do here, and that's keep this feed yard full at a reasonable price on the cattle that come in. We also purchase all the commodities here at the facility. So it's really helped me understand that side of the business, explain our side of the business to those operators, and to form a relationship there. So when you talk to a cow-calf person and they understand you've been in those shoes, then it makes it easier.
With your role now, do you work directly with a lot of cow-calf producers?
Yes, we actually do. The drought of 2010, 11, and 12, which we're just coming out of another one, but it allowed us to really reach further down into the chain and form a lot of relationships with cow-calf producers and stocker operators. I would say probably, and this is an estimate, but I'd guess 15 to 20% of the cattle that come into this facility are direct purchased, meaning there's no middleman in between. It's operators and producers that I deal with directly.
Well, so I know last year when we were on that Ranch Your Mind call and producers were asking questions about, what are feedlots looking for in calves? How can they improve the calves that they're raising? A lot of the conversation was around building relationships with feedlots. So what does that kind of process look like if calf producers do want to start building relationships with the people who are buying their calves? I mean, what really goes into that aspect of it, just because sometimes there is a middleman?
Yes, and I think there's a need for both. I mean, I think in some instances it works better if a producer can deal direct with the feed yards, and others would like a person in between. And I understand both, and we do both. So either way, it's fine. But part of it is the cattle and the education. We to buy cattle direct, we would prefer cattle to be weaned or backgrounded in some sort of fashion. Just from a health standpoint, we think it's easier to get cattle straight where they're from, right? Instead of shipping them straight to us and then us trying to get them straight. I think it's easier on the cattle for the cattle's well-being to be backgrounded and straightened out close to where they were raised. And so depending on the people and the producer and the facilities they have, that has a lot to do with it. And then, of course, health background and vaccination background and how the cattle were handled, all that plays a part in it. So a larger operation that can do those things are probably more apt to reach out direct to us than, someone that's got a half a load or something like that.
What do you define as a larger operation? Just curious, because I think large operation geographically, depending on where cow-calf producers are, large might vary in our minds. So what do you kind of define as a large operation?
The smallest pen I have is, for 60 head. And so 60 head, we can handle 60 head if they're taken care of and their background are properly weaned with all proper vaccinations, then we can we can deal with somebody with 60 head, depending on where they're from and all that stuff. And then up to, thousands of head. So we deal with both currently. I've got operators that have, one load between their steers and their heifers, and they'll either sell them or put them on feed with us. We do some retained ownership things, and we can work with people through that if they want to retain them. And I encourage people, if they really want to know what they have in their cattle, to own them all the way through. You don't have to maybe do it every year, but do it once, and we can provide the data from the plant, the carcass data, so that they understand what they have, and the performance data. So that always helps. It's educational for them and for us both.
Well, I think, that data piece, that's something that gets talked about a lot on this podcast, no matter what segment of the beef industry we're talking about, or even smaller subsegments within cow-calf too. It's that data is so important for us as producers to continue making improvements and for everyone to learn and make improvements.
Hey folks, I want to take a brief break to talk about one of my favorite calving books. And if you're tired of the hassle of managing your cattle records, I want to introduce you to Cattle ID because it will do the work for you. The Cattle ID platform makes it easy to store, share, and collaborate on all your herd information from your mobile device. It saves you a lot of time and effort. Plus, you get access to actionable analytics that can help you and your team make better decisions for your ranch. Don't just take my word for it. Try Cattle ID and feel the magic of hassle-free ranch management for yourself. Seriously, sign up now and see the difference it can make for you and your team. There's a link in the show notes.
Kind of shifting gears here, what do you think is the main challenge feedlots are facing right now?
Well, the cattle industry changes with the dynamics of the markets and with the drought, if you add in the drought. And so just shrinking supplies right now would be a concern. That's not always a concern, but right now it would be. Feed costs are a concern, which is great for farmers, and it's hard to get upset, but the feed costs are just high, and everybody that's feeding the cow right now, or a yearling or one in the feed yard, knows that feed costs are high. And so that's a challenge. And the labor market has always been a challenge my whole career. It seems like it ebbs and flows, the labor market does, but to do what we do every day is probably not the most romantic thing in the world. So it's always tough to keep, a full staff, and it's hard to run one of these things if you don't have a good crew. So, between the changing in the markets and the drought and how it affects the markets and the cattle cycle and the labor market, it keeps us on our toes.
So with those challenges, how has that impacted how you're operating as a business? Because you are a business. So when those challenges arise, you have to make adjustments, just like cow-calf producers, just like anyone else.
Yes, that's true. And, we've been able to stay relatively full, the past 4 or 5 years, 6, 7, back really to the last time we had a drought and the cattle cycle supplies dropped down and they kind of turned over. So it's been good. Of course, we're margin operators, and that's what I have to remind people is we have to buy and we have to sell. And so, there's a lot of times cattle feeding is not profitable. And so it ebbs and flows, and it's like I said, it's kind of like a stocker operation, except on a larger scale. And so you're buying and you're selling. So it's always a challenge to do that. And I think, but going forward here, the shrinking cattle supplies are definitely going to be an issue. And I think you'll have a lot of empty feed yards. I think you'll have a lot of bunk space that's not filled for the next 3 to 4 years. And that'll definitely be a challenge.
Well, thank you for being honest about that. And on the contrary, what's one of the biggest opportunities you see in the feedlot segment in the next 5 to 10 years that maybe you're excited about?
You know, I think education, we've never been, as open book as we probably should be. Not that we are closed book, just it's not a fancy romantic job. And so we do, and it's not been real popular. You know, you hear more about grass fed and more about things like that, which is great. And there's a market for it. And I support it 100%. But we still have to make beef for, the general public that that are quite willing to pay, maybe a premium for a grass fed product or an organic product. And with the population growth the way it is across the world, not only in the US, we really have to provide a reasonably priced, good quality product. And that's what we try to do. And we have programs in our company, we have all natural programs. We have programs you get exported. So we can do about anything. I think what you'll see in the next, in the future here is different branded beef programs, different types of programs. And to be a part of that, change your operation, tweak what you're feeding, tweak the way you do things to provide beef into that program, I think will be exciting. I think that will be an opportunity. And then the education part on telling people what we do, giving tours. We give a lot of tours here. Not opposed to it at all. So if anybody'd like to come look, we'll show you around.
Well, awesome. And thank you for that invite to anyone out there who's listening. And so, you brought up programs, which I think is something else I kind of want to ask you a little bit about. Cattle producers are always, as business owners themselves, they're always trying to figure out, how can I make my calves more valuable to help their business? So does, in your mind, does that look like trying to get involved in one of those programs? I mean, they're traditionally called value-added programs, but we're branded beef programs. So what, I guess, maybe let's say, ask the broader question, like what can cattle producers do to try and add more value to their cattle so that they work better and do their job when they are in the feedlot?
Absolutely. There's lots of programs out there now, more and more all the time. You've got natural programs, you've got branded beef programs, you've got non-hormone cattle that can be exported to certain countries. And all those are possible from just a basic verification up to like a GAP 4 deal, which is like the extreme, not bad, just very thorough, right? If you want your cattle in that, you have to go through a thorough process to get them eligible for that. And I think one of the basic things you can do is, be good stewards of your cattle and give them a good background, give them good vaccination, have a good vaccination history on them, and make them ready to go to the next level. And I think that's probably the most basic thing you can do, all the way up to, if you prefer to get into one of the more all natural programs, you can do that too. Those programs 10 years ago were still kind of a niche deal. However, today they're more and more popular, and we figure they would gain traction, and they have, and there's a big demand for that. So that's an opportunity as well to increase the value of your cattle. But we still need just regular cattle, good commodity cattle that are healthy and well taken care of and with a great health history. And so there's a spot for all of them.
Is there a specific way you like that information to come across, like as far as those records getting to you? Like, how do you know, what can producers do to help, whether it's going through the sale barn or another middleman or the feedlot, like to get that information across, like these are how these calves were raised, whether it was mineral program, vaccinations, other nutrition factors. How do you like that information to come across or get to you?
Well, a lot of our business is still, handshake deal. It's verbal. We trade thousands and thousands and thousands of cattle. It used to be by telephone. Now it's by email and text message. And so, but if just a background on the calves, what vaccinations have they have, what other things have you done with them? What's the background? Are they on grass? Are they on wheat? Are they on ryegrass? Are they, maybe out of a grow yard of some sort? We buy those as well. Just give a basic understanding of where they've been and what they've done. And then that's for just regular commodity cattle. And then if they are eligible for a non-after program, we have to have the documentation that tells us, the verification, the process that you've been through in order to be eligible for that program, because we have to pass that on to the next level whenever the cattle finish.
Do you have a lot of cattle producers who come to view their calves as they're finishing out? Even whether they've retained ownership or maybe they didn't, but they know that's where their calves went. Do people come to look and see how their calves are growing and doing in the feedlot?
We do occasionally, not a lot, but folks that are interested in seeing them, we deal direct with some producers out of Florida, and they usually come up once a year and look at their calves and just, they knew what they looked like when they sent them, and they want to see them when they're close to being finished. And so, and we've had other producers as well, especially the ones that retain ownership. They usually like to come look at them before they're harvested. And we welcome that. And just like I mentioned, we welcome to share the data with them. Not something that every feeding entity does. I'm not sure why. And that's of their own volition. We try to be pretty open. We want people to get to be better, and in order to be better, they need the feedback. And so we'll provide the performance data to them, as well as the harvest data, and then they can make adjustments based on that.
So kind of a bigger question here, but if you could wave a magic wand and change any one thing about how cow-calf producers are doing business right now or raising cattle, what would you like to change?
Different parts of the country need different types of cattle, and we understand that. And I don't know if we're the ones that need to tell folks what kind of cattle to raise or how they should do. We see the need for, up in the Dakotas, in your part of the world, they raise really, really nice front end type, Angus cattle and other breeds as well. And then in South Texas, those cattle would burn up, right? They'd get too hot in South Texas. So they need something with a little more of a Brahman influence. And so it's hard for me to be judgmental. Sitting where I am in the Panhandle of Texas, we tend to get a few more of those Brahman type cattle and feed them out here. And that makes sense because they would do better here, and they probably wouldn't really love y'all's winters, especially like you've had this year. So, so there's a spot for all of them. There really is. But if you have a good product and have cattle that work for you, learn more about them in the feed yards and how they do perform, and then make changes based on that. That's all we can ask. I don't think there's any one thing other than a good health background and a good background and be good stewards of the cattle. That's all we can ask.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, and that's another theme that gets talked about on the show is that gets talked about on the show a lot is that it takes all kinds of kinds, and everyone runs their business differently. And that's right. United States geographically varies so much. So I appreciate you bringing that up. So what is one thing, we're kind of wrapping up here, and what's one thing you want cow-calf producers to understand about the feedlot industry and maybe even building that relationship?
Well, it's a great question. And I think the main thing is I'd like people to understand what we do. I think to your point, and the reason I agree to do things like this is because I want people to understand what we do and how we do it and why we do things. And in order to do that, you have to form a relationship. You have to ask questions, and it's a margin business. So we can only give what we can give. If we think we have to stay in business. So that's the other thing is that we can only do what we can do. And another thing is we don't mind if a producer wants to sell their cattle a different direction because it works better for them, then that's perfectly okay. We'd love to have folks' business. We have lots of pens to fill, so we're always open to listening and learning, and to understand that most of us we're all in the same business. To me, it's a beef business. It's not a cow calf. It's not a stocker. It's not a feed yard. It's not a packer. It's the beef business, and we're all in it together. That's tough sometimes for everybody to agree to that, and that's to each his own opinion, right? But we're all in the same business. We're trying to produce the end product to go to the consumer and something that consumer will buy, and ultimately that'll make us all more effective and efficient in what we do and more successful in the business. So that's the main thing.
Well, Ryan, before we wrap up today, do you have any final thoughts that you want to share?
No, I appreciate the opportunity and always open to the conversation, and education, again, like I mentioned, is something that we feel like we've been a little lax in the cattle feeding sector. And so we like people to understand what we do and how we do it, why we do it, and get to know that we're producers just like they are.
Well, thank you, Ryan.
You bet.
And that's a wrap on that one, folks. Thank you for tuning in today and joining in on the conversation. Be sure to take this a step further and take the advice you learned and implement it on your operation. If you want to have a conversation about it, head over to my social media and send me a DM by following @CattleConvos and connecting with me there. Have a great day.